Hello everyone, welcome to Tactica Imperialis and to today's video. Today is going to be a Warhammer 40,000 theory video, and today I wish to answer a question I've seen asked many times in comments, both on my videos and in the comments for our podcast Adeptus Podcastus. In recent times, as you will all know, Roboute Guilliman has returned to become Lord Commander of the Imperium of Man. Since his return, he has led the Primaris Space Marines and the Indomitus Crusade, helping to stabilise the Imperium after the appearance of the Cicatrix Maledicta. But many people have been asking the same question. Is he planning to form an alliance with the other races in the galaxy, either short-term or long-term? In particular, they point to Ivrain and the Inari, who of course had a role to play in Guilliman's return, and the Tau Empire, particularly Commander Farsight, as ideal allies for the Imperium. So today I want to look at the small amount of evidence there is, and try and use what we know of the various factions and individuals in question to see whether any form of alliance could be forged. Of course, this is just my opinion, and I know anything involving these guys in the modern era can be a bit divisive, so let me know what you think in the comments below. One distinction, we're not going to be looking at this from a business or a player-based standpoint, we're looking at this from in-universe logic, at least as far as possible. For the moment, however, let's just look at the evidence for it before we analyse each potential ally in turn. Let us begin. First off, I want to look at the evidence both for and against Guilliman forming an alliance with the Xenos, since if we can't find anything there, then we're wasting our time. The primary reason people seem to favour an alliance comes from both the individuals involved and the situation of the galaxy at large. If ever there was a Primarch capable of the intricate diplomacy required to negotiate with the Xenos race, it would be Roboute Guilliman, the greatest empire builder amongst the Adeptus Astartes, and perhaps of all aside from the Emperor and Malcador. He knows what the Imperium needs, having begun to reform it following his return and appointment as Lord Commander, and short of taking it by force, I reckon he's best placed to get it. Add that to how the galaxy finds itself at this moment, with the Cicatrix Maledictum bisecting it rather neatly. If ever the Imperium was in need of aid, it's now. Huge number of worlds are besieged or threatened by chaos, the Tyranid hive fleets continue to encroach, the Orcs are everywhere like usual, and much, much more. It is truly the grim darkness of the 42nd millennium at this point. Surely with a diplomat like Guilliman, they might be convinced to seek allies, even if it's just to help out Dante and others in the Dark Imperium in a slightly quieter deal. I mean, it's common sense if you think about it. The Xenos races don't have the same territory or influence as the Imperium, their technology and resources could be vital for keeping humanity on their feet, and trading it and a handful of space for military aid, well, it has to be a good idea, doesn't it? Then again, this is the Imperium, and common sense doesn't really apply to them. When your empire is so backward that invention is heresy, unless your name is Belisarius Cawl, the promise of Xenos technology is pointless. They wouldn't use it pretty much at all, even if it would benefit them, unless they were maybe like Death Watch or something. Add this to perceptions of the general Imperial in population. The mutated abhumans are seen as abominations, so what on earth would they make of a Tau or an Eldari? In fact, I'd wager your average Imperial Joe doesn't know these races exist in many cases. They're probably just not told. And if you think the mistrust of a citizen is bad, what are the Astra Militarum going to think? Xenophobia pretty much is probably part of how to be an Imperial Soldier 101, not to mention the Space Marines, or the Inquisition, or the Sisters of Battle, or the Ecclesiarchy. You get where I'm going with this. Finally, you have the question of ethos. In the eyes of the Imperium, the galaxy is theirs by right to own. No one else can have it. It's humanity's. But at the same time, the Eldari look at the galaxy as their empire, especially the Inari, who wish to restore said empire to its glory days. You can see where I'm going with this. If no side is willing to compromise, there's no way in the warp they're going to end up working together, and especially not long term. And yet. We have seen incidents of Imperial Xenos alliances in isolated cases. Caiaphas Cain and the Tau against the Tyranids, or, of course, the Inari and the survivors of Cadia more recently. Sure, they're one-off, but they count. Even the Necrons have worked for the Imperium from time to time, but we'll get to that later. So do we believe there's a chance of a broader alliance between the Imperium/Guilliman and the other races? Well, I think we have to admit it would be an outside possibility if we only look at it from a general, full-blown military alliance sharing of everything perspective, and we don't consider the individuals involved. So why don't we do that? Try and go race by race, individual by individual, see if we can find any possible or even probable future allies. The first ally I wish to discuss is the Tau Empire, with a bit of a focus on one Commander Farsight. For everything I just said previously about the other races not being willing to compromise or ally, the Tau are almost certainly the best bet for wanting to do so. After all, the greater good welcomes all races, as seen in the various auxiliaries to the Tau Empire and the Farsight Enclaves, humans included. This means that should the Imperials and Tau be able to sit at the negotiating table, it won't be Tau xenophobia or hostility that sours the deal. When it comes to the Farsight Enclaves, things might be even easier due to the lack of ethereals and the amount that Farsight actually knows. Farsight, of all the Tau, other than perhaps the ethereals, has the most knowledge of chaos due to his exposure of it on Arthas Moloch and elsewhere. Even if you don't subscribe to the theory he's a latent psyker or anything, you can't really deny he's been exposed. This means that if Guilliman were to invoke the danger of chaos, Farsight is best placed to understand, and his freedom from the ethereals means he can actually make a logical decision. After all, if the ethereals allied up, they'd probably have to reveal chaos to the wider populace, and they don't want to do that because they didn't do it with Farsight. You see my point. And I'm saying all of this even before we take into account the Cicatrix Maledicta, which has of course exposed pretty much everybody to the warp and its denizens. Then add in the loss of the Fourth Sphere expansion, the death of Almvar, probably heralding a new change in management, and the fact that the Tau aren't too far from Macragge in the grand scheme of things, and you start to see why people think the Tau make good allies. Admittedly, they need warp travel to make it work, but assuming that's included in the deal, maybe they just trade some navigators. It's not impossible. However, we have a few catches. The first is the actual size of the Tau Empire, and even more so the Farsight Enclaves. Quite frankly, the Tau's galactic presence is, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, tiny. Their military presence is borderline negligible compared to the Imperium's, so whilst they might be a useful ally or a buffer state on the eastern fringe, they can't deploy over a wide area in large numbers. As a result, what do the Imperium stand to gain aside from technology, which we've already said almost none of them will use or accept? Plus, for all I've talked up the Tau's open-minded attitude to alliance with other races, the greater good is as Tau first as anything else. The best bid may well be mind control, there's talk of sterilization amongst humans, so on and so forth. You also must consider the Tau's perception of chaos. We don't have a full picture in the modern era just yet, but they certainly don't seem very knowledgeable of what chaos is, or anything to do with it really, probably due to ethereal interference. To be fair, this is true of the Imperium as well in most cases, but it needs mentioning. This is why I don't think, unless there's a serious shift in ethos from the next Ethereal Supreme, the main Emperor will be filling up a long-term alliance. They might work together for a battle or a campaign or two. Maybe they'd just be emissaries so they can talk to each other on the eastern fringe. But that'll be it. The Imperials will never budge unless the humans join the greater good, because it counters the Imperial Creed, kind of, in their mind anyway, and somehow I doubt that despite what text-to-speech suggests, there's a way to turn the Imperial Creed into said greater good as a means of alliance for the common goal. As for Farsight, I think he's open-minded enough to go for it, but as I said, the Enclaves just don't have enough military presence to justify it for the Imperium. They'd be a buffer state at most, a waste of time and resources most likely, as it just wouldn't work for Guilliman, especially without other allies in play to actually make it worthwhile. Admittedly, we have yet to receive the Tau Codex for the new setting at the time of recording, which will shed light, hopefully, on the state of play in that little corner of the galaxy. Maybe that'll be of use in getting a clearer picture when it comes out. However, for the moment I have to say that whilst the personalities at play might make it possible, I don't think the Tau have the mindset and the Enclaves the numbers to make any grand alliance feasible in the long run. Also, consider this. Guilliman has bigger things to do right now than to try and work with a tiny little Xenos empire on the eastern fringe. He's kind of got an Imperium to run/save. That means that unless the Tau are able to talk to other Space Marines or Imperials in their area, there's no way an alliance will be forged anyway. The Lord Commander's a bit busy to go and see them personally. I mean, no offence to the Tau, I quite like the Tau and I really like Farsight, but you have to admit they are just too small to make anything work. Now, let's clear the pothole-shaped elephant from the room and discuss Ivrain and the Inari. Putting aside the shipping of Guilliman and Ivrain, because damn it is that annoying and I don't want to hear about it, the Inari seem to be the most logical alliance for the Imperium as they solve the main problem the Tau have: numbers, power, and presence. The Eldari, though not as numerous as humans, can still field a lot of decent armies at once, and perhaps most importantly, they have the webway, meaning they're able to reach further flung theatres of war on relatively short notice in reasonable safety. When you add in the advanced technology they possess, their powerful seers from the craft world contingent in particular, and the power of every individual Inari compared to most average warriors, and you get the ideal alliance candidate for Guilliman. The Inari are also a fast-growing faction too. More and more Eldari from all walks of life are joining their cause all the time, meaning their usefulness will only continue to grow as their influence and reach expand in turn. Plus, the two groups are already in some sort of arrangement. I mean, we don't quite know what it is. It's perhaps a non-aggression pact, or an if there's no clash of interest, leave them alone type of deal. Whatever it is, it means that the two, i.e. Guilliman and the Inari, have communication in place, as evidenced when the Imperials passed on the information regarding the Hand of Darkness to Ivrain via Eldrad Ulthran. But would this seed be able to blossom into a full-blown alliance? Well, if the Imperium could get past its xenophobia long enough not to turn on the Inari, it makes total sense for Guilliman to want an alliance with them. They have power and presence along with skills that would be useful on and off the battlefield, and if they can succeed in their ultimate goal, they effectively take a Chaos God out of the equation, assuming at least they aren't corrupted and Iniad isn't Slaanesh 2.0. The main problem this time actually lies with the Inari themselves, as they find themselves in an interesting position because of the Eldari mindset. To Eldari, it's always been that humans are simple-minded, crude, or something like that. They look at humans like humans look at monkeys and other primates. This means that on more than one occasion, the Eldari have simply not trusted humans to get a job done, and the factions have come to blows as a result. And generally, all Eldari factions have, well, not done themselves any favours. With the Inari, said job that needs to get done is the defeat of Slaanesh to save the Eldari from extinction. Perhaps the most important mission in the species' history, at least in recent times. I mean, I don't know if it's more important than the War in Heaven, but yeah. As a result, how much is Ivrain willing to trust the humans to get anything done, when they've proved time and again how susceptible they are to corruption, and how their zealotry can be more trouble than it's worth when you need a scalpel and not a sledgehammer? And then you have the issue of leadership. These are probably the two largest good guy, and I use that quote strenuously, factions in the galaxy. Somehow I can't see Ivrain letting Guilliman be in command of the Alliance, directing the Inari or elements of it wherever he needs them. She's got a mission to complete, and damn if some Monkai is going to stop her. On the same note, however, there's no way that Guilliman could be seen to be taking orders from a Xenos about how and where he prosecutes his campaigns, even if the Imperium could temperate xenophobia, that is just completely unacceptable for a Lord Commander, and would only increase suspicion and hostility. You could argue, therefore, they could just reinforce whatever arrangement they have at the moment, trading intel and perhaps asking, well, if you've got any spare troops or operatives, we could use them at X planet for X engagement against Y enemy for Z amount of time. That does run the risk of the Inari particularly becoming stretched, as the Imperium actually has a lot of territory to defend, but it would be a logical progression from the situation today, and it allows both groups to work independently without obligation, whilst allowing them to tag team on critical missions or worlds. The question you then have to ask yourself is, at what point do we consider this non-aggression pact to have become an alliance? I think if the situation evolves to the one we just described, then it is an alliance, albeit something of a loose one that would be strained almost as soon as there was a conflict of interest. I mean, say for a second the last Crone Sword is discovered to be in, I don't know, the Omega Vault or the Imperial Palace. Ivrain needs it, but will the Imperium let her have it from such heavily guarded and perhaps even sacred places? That would be the acid test for any Imperium-Inari alliance, and I don't think it's a test it could pass due to the nature of both sides, except maybe if Ivrain played the whole I resurrected you, Guilliman, you owe me card. However, I must admit that unless that particular circumstance does come up, there is definitely scope for an alliance, or at least an extension of whatever agreement there is now between the two sides. Is the true alliance or a coalition, and will it last? I'll leave that to you to decide. Let me know in the comments. So there we go, right? Inari check, Tau check. No, wait, there's one more I want to discuss. This is a bit, well actually it's a lot of a dark horse, but we cannot rule out the possibility of Cesarek, better known as the Silent King, former ruler of the Necrons. Following the defeat of the Catan, the Silent King completely upped and left the galaxy, whilst the Necrons as a whole went to sleep for several million years. However, after encountering the Tyranids somewhere beyond the galaxy, he realised the threat posed by the Great Devourer, and he made all haste to return. He completely dashed back to the galaxy. He's since been travelling the galaxy alongside Triarch Praetorians, attempting to awaken the Tomb Worlds and unite the Necrons once more in an attempt to stop the Tyranids. What his actual end goal is unclear. Is it biotransference? Harvesting the galaxy for himself because he just called dibs? Is it simply to rebuild a portion of the old Necron Empire? Could be any of these or 1,000 things besides. So why would the Silent King and the Necrons want to ally with the Imperium? And why would the Imperium even want them? Well, from an Imperial standpoint, the Necrons are perhaps even more powerful than the Inari if they can be awakened in large enough numbers. They're widespread, they're able to use the web wave, they have dolmen gates, they're nigh on impossible to put down permanently, and they have incredible technology. Plus, those dynasties with limited webway access are actually pretty confined to their regions of space. This means you can have Necron bubbles of defense around the galaxy that either can work in tandem with or separate from the Imperial ones, such as Baal or Macragge. If the Silent King also chose to re-establish his command protocols, assuming such a thing is possible, it would also completely eliminate any threat of rebellion from upstart pharaohs who'd want to turn on the humans they see as cattle to be harvested. This does have a downside if Cesaric goes hostile, as it would turn all the Necrons everywhere, but it's something to consider, because with the Inari, well, there are quite a few elements, particularly of the Drukhari type, who probably don't want anything to do with the Monkai. As for Cesaric himself, he's actually proposed alliance before, during the Gehenna campaign against guess who? Commander Dante of the Blood Angels, the overall warden of the Dark Imperium. This alliance was an enemy of my enemy situation against the Tyranids, but both sides honoured it in the aftermath and they withdrew without further conflict. Again, we're not sure why the Silent King did this, but he must at least see some potential in the Imperium, even if it's simply a giant wall of guns that can thin the Tyranid numbers enough for the Necrons to finish them off. With Dante, I'm not going to say in his corner to confirm his sincerity, but you sort of get my point, I think Cesaric could make a compelling case for an alliance with the Imperium if he wanted to, though the amount within the Necron race itself that would agree, assuming no command protocols, is a little questionable. That's only half the battle though, as once again we find ourselves in a situation of clashing goals with an uncertain endgame. Guilliman's biggest concern right now, along with the Imperium itself, is almost certainly the forces of chaos, whereas the Silent King is more focused on the Tyranids. As the warp is kind of no big deal for the Necrons, who are soulless and incorruptible and the like, I think Cesaric would be much less likely to waver from that focus. But I think Guilliman could see the value in defeating the Tyranids now, in order to help with the endless war on chaos in the long run, because the battle with chaos you can't actually win, ever, basically. But then once the Tyranids are seen off, assuming that even happens, what do the Necrons do next? Do they turn on the Imperium in an attempt to grab territory and re-establish their empire? Or do they honour their alliance or broker some sort of deal? I mean, they could take all the world the Tyranids consumed, since they're dead and near useless for the Imperials. And then we have to consider the Inari in this whole messy equation as well. The Eldari, as a race, hate the Necrons. They're soulless, the ultimate abominations. As a result, what would Ivrain or Eldrad say if they suddenly found out the Imperium was allied with these things? That little non-aggression pact might have suddenly come under threat. And if it holds, I can't see the Inari ever turning up to help the Necrons out. Some old War of Heaven grudges never die, I suppose. Same might well apply in reverse too. If Cesaric caught wind of the arrangement between Guilliman and Ivrain, he might decide he doesn't want to help the humans after all, at least not the Lord Commander who's working with the enemy. However, Dante still exists. Okay, humour me here, I'm about to propose something a little bit crazy. Actually, no, this is completely off the deep end crazy. What if you have Guilliman and the Inari fighting Chaos and whatever else in the Light Imperium on the Terran side of the Cicatrix Maledictum, whilst Dante and the Necrons defend the Dark Imperium against Chaos and Tyranids respectively? The Imperials coordinate between the two sides, the Necrons on the Terran side either hold their space or just work their way east, and the Inari only go to the Dark Imperium if they need to get a certain resource or stop a particularly dangerous invasion, complete a ritual, and the like. I know, it's never going to happen. This is best case scenario, especially if you add in the Tau holding their little corner. But it would be a fun way to get around the Inari Necron problem, and it would take a hell of a load up for Guilliman and Dante when it comes to defending the Dark Imperium. Like I said, never going to happen, best case scenario, but damn is it fun to think about. So what can we conclude from our little investigation? Well, that best case scenario is a no-go. There's no way the Inari and Necrons were content to sharing an alliance in my mind. However, does that mean our alliance theory is dead in the water? No, not at all. As we stated earlier, I think there's definite potential for the arrangement between the Imperium and the Inari to improve to a sort of alliance as time goes by, even if there's no full-blown treaty signing to seal the deal. It would take some work, but I can also see potential for a ceasefire between the Tau and the Imperium if the right people are in the right place and get together. It won't be an alliance, the Tau are too small and kind of not useful for that. There's no way the Imperium would let them expand into anything but empty space, but there's a shred of a chance it has to be considered. As for the Necrons, they are definitely my wild card, and a lot would hinge on how many of the Necrons chose to support or follow to Zarek. If you can get a large enough force together to challenge the Tyranids, I could see him making selective alliances with the Imperium on a case-by-case basis to ensure victory, sort of like the Mefrit dynasty and Anrakir the Traveller did with the Blood Angels in the Cryptus campaign. With Dante being such a key figure in the Dark Imperium, he's kind of in charge of it, I could certainly even see there being a deal between the two, though what form it would take and whether it would extend to Guilliman, I don't know. Bear in mind that we have made a hell of a lot of assumptions even to get to this point, so even though these not quite alliances or non-aggression pacts would be a pretty big stretch if you apply it on a galactic scale, sure, the leaders might agree, but I doubt everyone under them will see it in the same way. So everything I've said, I'm still being completely, massively over-optimistic. Of course, that's just my opinion, looking exclusively in-universe logic, not considering what would be best for business in the eyes of GW or us. So just bear that in mind too when you consider your own opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Could the Imperium make any alliances with the Xenos in future? And if so, with whom? And in what sort of alliance would they be? Also, let me know what theories you'd like to try and cover in future. I read all your comments and I look forward to discussing things about this video with you. Thank you all for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.